Welcome and hello from Alex, with a story from r/PettyRevenge, where a credit card hacker went on a PS3 spending spree, leading to a job interview with unexpected perks. Coming up next is a story from PultR88. PlayStation banned my account after someone fraudulently spent about $500 from my credit card, so I got Sony to fly me to California. So this all took place a little over 5 years ago. I had a PlayStation account and a PS4, but I didn't have 2FA set up. Whoops. Anywho, one morning I woke up to $500 in charges to the PlayStation network on my credit card for that account. I ended up contacting PlayStation support to explain the situation, and they proceeded to try and gaslight me by saying that I must have legitimately purchased what was a slew of PS3 games. I never owned a PS3, and that I must have shared my password with whoever did the purchasing. Turns out the purchase was from Brazil. After a lot of back and forth with them not budging to just refund and remove the games after I changed my password and enabled 2FA, I did a chargeback via my credit card, which led to my account being suspended. All in all, I probably had about $200-ish in digital games that I lost access to. As for a bit of background on me, I'm a software developer in the middle of the US, and 5 years ago the market was ridiculous. I had plans to go to a conference in California a couple months after all of this and was going to buy my own plane ticket. So I had the idea of applying to a job with Sony in their San Jose tech office so I could get them to fly me out for my conference on their dime. Long story short there, I heard back from a recruiter, the phone screen went well, and I was flown to my conference via a ticket provided by Sony. They even took me to lunch and paid for a night at a hotel so I could be in San Jose the day after the event. It actually worked out kind of nicely as I had a FAANG interview planned for not too long afterwards. So it was a good opportunity to just practice interviewing. They ended up offering me a job. Pay was a lot lower than what I was making in Denver, despite it being a San Jose-based role, which I turned down, and I'd say I ended up at a net positive of about $200. That's some impressive maneuvering. OP, getting Sony to pay for your trip to California just to attend a conference is some next-level thinking. Sure, it involved applying for a job you didn't necessarily want, but hey, free flight, hotel, and lunch. Can't knock the hustle. Now, Sony's customer service sounds atrocious. Trying to gaslight you over fraudulent charges. Unbelievable. Doing a chargeback was the right move, even if it meant losing access to some digital games. But getting reimbursed and sticking it to Sony by turning the tables and getting them to fly you out. Genius. The job offer itself might not have been ideal, but using the interview as practice for a bigger opportunity down the line. Smart thinking. OP came out way ahead in this situation, not just financially, but by outsmarting a company with bad customer service and gaining valuable interview experience. Bravo. Coming up next is a story from sptvunhinged. I let my flatmate shit themselves, which ultimately led to their eviction. This was around 15 years ago. I had a flatmate, let's call her Julie, who was always crying poor and never paid bills on time, etc. She then announces she's headed to Bali for a week. I said, before you go, are you going to give me the money you owe me for her part of our utility bills? She said when she gets back. I am livid, so off she goes. On the last day she messages me and tells me she's got Bali belly and had diarrhea all day and worried about the flight home. She also informs me she is broke and could I pay for her taxi home, around $100 from the airport, as she's worried about taking public transport back in case her stomach is still upset. I told her I would be working and not home to pay for her taxi. She says fine, she'll ask one of her friends she's on holiday with to give her the money. Then she informs me she didn't take her house keys with her and could I leave them hidden somewhere so she could get into the house when she gets home. I don't reply, but I assume she thinks I will. Anyway, I wasn't really working, so I hid in my bedroom and I could see the front entrance from my bedroom upstairs and peek out the window. I watch her drive up and exit the taxi. She couldn't locate keys, so starts trying all different ways to get in. I had prepared and made sure every access point was locked up. She starts calling my phone, which I ignore. I can hear her swearing, and then she's doubled over, and before I know it, she's shitting herself. She's in a denim skirt and it's runny. Now I'll be honest, I was not quite expecting her shitting on our doorstep. I was more thinking she'd freak out and have to sit outside all day till I came home, but this was a far more perfect outcome. I only wish I could have filmed it. She is horrified but changes into something from her luggage and hides her soiled clothes and suitcase in a bush in the front yard and takes off down the street. I take that opportunity to leave the house, and on my way out, whilst gagging, I placed her soiled clothes inside her suitcase. A few hours later, I finally call her back pretending to be on my lunch break, and she's screaming down the phone blaming me for not leaving out her keys and that she's been sitting outside for hours and begging me to come home to let her in. I said sorry, I have to still finish work and have plans this evening, and she'd have to either call a locksmith or wait till I get home. She said I can taxi over my keys to her, which I refuse. She hangs up, and then I treat myself to 2 movies at the cinema and a nice dinner. I get home later that evening and she's broken a window to get in. The next morning I contact the landlord and tell them what she did, as we paid rent individually. And they always had issues with her late rent. They said they would look at evicting her as they'd had enough too. She doesn't speak to me at all, and a few weeks later I am informed via the landlord she's moving out. We never speak again. I am pretty sure she tells the story as me being a psycho flatmate, which I am happy to wear that badge proudly. Well, that's some messy revenge, literally. On one hand, Julie sounds like a nightmare roommate. Always broke, irresponsible, and inconsiderate, leaving you with the bills and expecting a free taxi ride. Yikes, but letting her stew in her, well, predicament might be a bit much. However, the image of her freaking out on the doorstep, then breaking a window, priceless, sounds like she got a taste of her own medicine, finally facing some consequences for her actions. You might be considered a bit ruthless for not letting her in, but honestly, after all the inconsideration, it's hard not to cheer you on a little. Maybe next time Julie will be a more responsible roommate, or at least learn to pack her house keys. Just hope that story about you being a psycho flatmate doesn't come back to bite you. Coming up next is a story from mopedmister, and if you like the video so far, don't forget to like the video. It only takes a second and helps me out a lot. I finally put my foot down for my spoiled sister's bad behavior and stood up to my parents. This story is at least a decade old, but it's still one of my most satisfying petty revenge stories. When I, then 19 male, was home for the summer from college, my sister, then 17 female, was reveling in being the only child in the house. My sister is the baby of the family and likes it. We generally get along, but she could occasionally be a spoiled brat. I am the opposite of my sister. For most of my childhood I was a bit of a doormat, classic middle child, very well behaved and under the radar. I didn't fight back much, did as I was told, and generally behaved. The biggest shakeup I brought to the family was when I came out as gay at 17. No one was really bothered by it, and my family is generally pretty supportive. Still, it was a difficult thing to process, and I am glad I got to the point I have today. This is relevant to the story. Now, at the time I was a much better and more responsible driver than my sister, and as a condition for staying at home for the summer rent-free, my parents would occasionally ask me to drive my sister to and from places they didn't want her driving, usually longer distances or on the highway. For the most part I did not mind. I love my sister and we generally get along very well. But like I said, she can occasionally be a real brat and has trouble when things don't go her way. One night my sister had gotten tickets to attend concert with a boy she liked. As my aunt and uncle were in town and my parents wanted to spend the afternoon having a few glasses of wine out on the patio, they asked if I would be okay driving my sister to the concert that evening. I accepted and figured that was that. My sister and cousins decided they wanted to look at some new outfits and asked me to drive with them to the mall. Being the good brother, cousin I was, I piled them into my car and took them to the mall. All was well until my sister decided I was getting on her nerves over something and we got into an argument. Wasn't a big deal until my sister, visibly annoyed, rolled her eyes and said, "You don't have to be such a faggot about it." I saw red. I had been called this word before and have been able to shrug it off, but from my own family, I was not going to take it. I could have yelled, argued more, or even stooped to her level, but it suddenly came over me what I was going to do. It was simple. I was not going to drive her to the concert. I told her as much and she smirked to tell me, "Yeah, right, like mom and dad are going to be okay with that." Now when we got home I went to my parents, explained what happened and let them know I would not be driving her to the concert. To my complete lack of surprise they took her side and explained to me they understood I was upset but I would still need to take her to the concert. My sister's smug look was all I needed. "No," was all I said. My parents seemed confused and then explained that that was not an option. I simply said, "You cannot make me. I do not care what you do. I will not drive her." Years of resentment over having to be the good sibling finally spilled out and I simply said no. My parents, a few glasses of wine deep, tried everything. They threatened to ground me, yelled at me, threatened to take my things, got in my face, and I held my ground. I told them I would take any punishment they wanted but no one could force me to drive her. At one point I even looked my father in the eye and said, "Tell me it's okay for her to call me a faggot. Tell me it's okay for anyone to do that," and my parents didn't know what to do. They were too drunk to drive and it was too late to ask anyone else. My sister refused to apologize, but as we got closer to the time we had to leave, I could tell she was starting to panic. The rage on her face was building up, and it was the sweetest revenge I could ask for. For once she wasn't going to get her way, and there was nothing she could do about it. Nothing would make me do it. This was the hill I would die on. My sister ended up missing more than half of the show and cried the whole night. It's what she deserved. As for me, my parents never even ended up punishing me. Maybe they were too stunned to do anything, or more likely saw that I was right. But from that point on I had no problem setting boundaries as needed. I could be kind, but I wasn't going to be my family's doormat. Now that's a story. Good on Opie for finally putting his foot down, letting his sister get away with calling him names like that all those years. No wonder he snapped. Sounds like years of built-up frustration finally came out. Standing up to your parents is never easy, but in this case, it seems long overdue. They might have been a little tipsy at the time, but using that as an excuse to ditch the responsibility is brilliant. Plus, the image of the spoiled sister missing half the concert because of her tantrum. Pure satisfaction. Maybe Opie pushed things a bit far, but sometimes you gotta fight fire with fire, right? Especially when it comes to family and standing up for yourself. And who knows, maybe this was the wake-up call the parents and sister both needed. Coming up next is a story from MoonSoonRob. Placed my roommate's cell phone number in every account while I worked as a debt collector. So in my early 22nd, I rented a 2-bedroom apartment and had one of my friends move in with me. Everything was great at first, but soon realized I had made a mistake. Any and all things that make a bad roommate this one man consisted of. I to this day have never had another roommate. One day while I was at work, I had a time-sensitive issue that I needed to discuss with him, and when I tried to reach him on the phone, he didn't pick up. He was notorious for not answering his phone. He would get a call and 9 out of 10 times he would just set it back down. So I called again, and once again he didn't answer. I then called him on the auto dialer so my work's number would show up, and he picked up on the first ring. I hung up, and for the rest of the day I inputted his number into every account I worked that day as a way of reaching the clients. Must have been at least 75. The beauty of this is for the next few months I got to hear about or see him receive dozens of calls looking for all different people. At first he tried to explain that he was not this person and to remove his number, but they never did. Lol, he would scream at them and ask them why they were doing this to him, that there's no reason all these people would have his number. He would make false threats saying that he had obtained a lawyer, and that he was going to sue them for harassment, but nothing stopped the calls. He eventually bit the bullet and got a new phone provider, and not long after I broke my lease and got the fuck out of there. It's been 15 years and I still laugh from time to time. Just thought it was time to share it with all of you. Wow, that's some cold-blooded revenge. On one hand, it sounds incredibly satisfying, getting months of payback for all those unanswered calls. Genius. But on the other hand, messing with someone's phone number like that could cause real problems. Imagine all those irate debt collectors blowing up his phone for months on end. Still, you gotta admit, there's a certain poetic justice to it. He wouldn't answer for you, so he gets bombarded with calls for everyone else. Maybe a bit extreme, but undeniably funny. I just hope he learned his lesson about answering the phone. Coming up next is a story from Bobby Backerson. When 6 inches costs $100 worth of lumber. So my neighbor and I live next to a light industrial area. Plumbers, electricians, and painters. Good businesses, no problems with them. In fact, having a plumber nearby has been great. So I put up a small shed to store my lawnmower and tools near our property line. Fussy neighbor calls the county because it is too close to the property line, and the county comes out and makes me move at 6. Not a huge deal, my mistake, but it was a pain. Fast forward 1 year and the neighbor built a new fence 8 tall to block his view of the industrial park. Good idea, but the county says the max is 6 and you need a permit to do so. Came home to him sawing off 2 along a 30 fence. I wonder how the county found out about this major infraction. Wow, karma can be a real fence post, huh? That neighbor sounds like a real piece of work. Gets you to move your shed 6 measly inches, then builds a whole privacy wall without following the rules. Talk about a double standard. Honestly, in my mind, Opie was justified in letting the county know. It's pretty satisfying to see the tables turned, especially after the whole shed incident. Maybe now the neighbor will learn a thing or two about following the rules and respecting boundaries, both physical and neighborly. That wraps up r/PettyRevenge. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to visit my Spotify channel. Link is in the description, so you can listen to the best Reddit story while being outside, and remember to hit that subscribe button.